russosbrand.com, where the pros are the pros.
Well, Bret Hart was on the Ariel Helwani show, and they were talking about modern wrestling. And Bret said, I watch certain guys, and I try to watch the pay-per-views. I find in a lot of wrestlers, and I won't necessarily name anybody, but I find that the wrestlers are more actors pretending to be wrestlers today than actual wrestlers. I miss the ruggedness of the characters. Guys like Kurt Hennig and myself, or Dynamite Kid, or that whole era of wrestlers that broke into the business in the 70s or late 70s and early 80s. We were still from the Harley Race, Terry Funk kind of generation, trying to be them or mimic them, top them. I think that's why I still think the 90s was the best era of wrestling. When I watch old 90s wrestling, it was really good stuff. I find that today's wrestling, it's a little bit more about promos and your character on TV and not so much your work rate. He said work rate. I like guys that throw back a little bit more to the work rate. Roman Reigns is a guy, for example, that I think tries really hard to earn the respect of my generation and be more realistic and just more credible, more believable, not so much of an actor. I find that, especially AEW, I find that they're mostly actors trying to pretend to be wrestlers. Get on with the real wrestling and just quit acting so much.
I don't think that anyone per se is consciously attempting to emulate the previous generation so much. I do agree that with him, that those that broke in the 70s and the 80s, early 80s, they were more in tune with what we're supposed to be attempting to do, which is trying to portray a actual physical contest, a wrestling contest. And then within that, the character or who you are within that context. And if you do go back and watch, there is more focus on the earlier generations, like you said, with Harley Race and Funk and those guys, that they were wrestlers first, and then they were working a wrestling match, where nowadays I think they are performing a wrestling match. And we've talked about this in the past. There's a big difference between the two. And I think that idea or that understanding of what exactly the word to work an audience has been lost over the generations. And I think that's what's led us to where we're at now, where we get a lot of performing and acting like we're wrestling a wrestling match, not actually trying to work an audience into believing that we're wrestling a wrestling match. Does any of that make sense? Or am I?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Hey, I want to ask you this. I've never asked you this before. Even when you were just breaking in, was there anybody you emulated in the ring? Like just anybody's style? Did you take from anybody in particular?
No one specific. I mean, there were lots of influences back in the day, but there was no one direct influence that I tried to emulate one particular person. Maybe Terry Funk a little bit, maybe Harley Race a little bit in manner or direction. But yeah, there was no one particular person that I really was like, that's the guy. The guys that actually, I guess, were believable to me were the ones that, and I think in general to an audience, were the ones that were obviously the bigger stars. I think back and not way back when I was a kid, watching, the original Sheik Ed Farhat's territory. That was a little different. But when I got older, I was in my teens, that was when the advent of cable television came through, and we got TBS out of Atlanta. We got Georgia Championship Wrestling, and guys like, Mr. Wrestling 2, to be honest, Dusty Rhodes, Austin Idol, Jimmy Valiant, the Masked Superstar. Bill Eadie was a tremendous guy to watch, and because he was so believable, and he was such a big guy, big man. That style, and listening to Gordon Soley, who would explain what the I don't know if necessarily the strategy, but okay, for instance, you get a lot of back then, you'd get a lot of well, if it ain't fake, well, why don't they just stop running the ropes type of thing? And if you go back and you watch, and Gordon Soley actually did help to explain that away, At no point in time, not like today's style, but back then, at no point in time at the very beginning of the match, very rarely did you ever see them shoot somebody in the ropes within the first couple of seconds, even the first couple of minutes. They'd always take somebody down immediately and actually try to ground them on the mat and wrestle them. And then as they worked them up, they would throw them in the ropes. And Soli's explanation is that the person who was being thrown into the ropes was either stunned or breathing heavy and was not as well, his wherewithal was not quite there. Mm-hmm. So he was rebounding off the ropes, adding momentum to whatever, the guy was about to do to him. So then the same goes in the same vein of why the wrestler would hit the ropes to clothesline somebody or to tackle them or to cross-body them. The idea was that the wrestler was throwing themselves into the ropes to add that momentum into the impact of whatever they were about to do, which, when you're watching it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. That's justifiable. And so there were great pains to help to make people either understand or explain away any questions in regards to working a wrestling match as opposed to performing one. And now we just accept that, it's performance art and everybody knows it's just performance art and no one wants to really believe it. They don't want to be worked anymore. I don't want to say that everyone wants to believe because I don't know if anyone actually ever completely, truly did believe. I don't know if they even did in earlier generations. I don't know if even back in the 50s and 60s, in the 70s, I don't think you can say 100% that everybody believed. I think they enjoyed it and were able to believe. There's a big difference between they believed and were able to believe. And that was what drove the business, was that ability to the wrestlers themselves being able to convince that audience and allowing them to believe and therefore emotionally invest and care, which then we go back to the premise of kayfabe, which was simply to honor and protect and to respect the audience and never violate what it was that you had sold to them, therefore making them feel like they had been wronged or had been basically, which they were, conned.
It's funny because I kind of disagree with what Brett is saying, and I'm not sure if Brett is really clear on what Brett is saying. They're more actors than they are wrestlers, and I don't think that's the case at all, because that's the problem. They're not actors. And a lot of times, like when I'm watching certain things, I always say, man, they're playing a wrestler. They're playing and doing something they saw on TV, because a lot of times today it doesn't fit. If their actions don't fit, their facials don't fit, the mannerism. I always go back to how we always go back to if this were real, because I do want to put myself in the moment where I'm believing it. And that's the thing, you're looking at it and you're not believing the acting, because at that point in that time, that person would not be acting that way. And I think, that's where I always say, man, you could tell a real wrestler and you could tell somebody that's playing the part of a wrestler, and it all comes down to, Al, believing them or not. That's what it really all comes down to.
Well, wrestlers first and foremost are not actors,
right?
In any way. You can make the comparison as much as you want. At most, at best, a wrestler is a method actor, but they're not an actor. And the reason they're not is they're not adopting a character, truly a character, a persona, a personality, an ID that is not, to some degree or another, directly who they really are. That's who wrestler, when you see a guy in the ring and he's really successful and he's really, you really connect with him, that's because that's who he is, or that's who she is. And that's why you're able to do that. They're not acting. They're just turning up that volume on that one person. That's that one aspect of their personality. So they're not acting in any way. They're just letting that other side of their personality out to play, the one that they just keep tamped down because of, being kind of, it's good society. But the real reason you don't believe in what they're doing is, quite honestly, they don't believe.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, it's sad, but a lot of them that don't, why they don't believe? Because they don't even know the lie that they're trying to tell. For years, I've went around, I'm not exaggerating. I've went around and I've asked this one question. I go, what's the one thing, just the one thing that is fake about professional wrestling? And no one can answer it. I've asked wrestlers in WWE, I've asked wrestlers in TNA, I have asked wrestlers in the independents, I have asked wrestlers up and down the roster. What is the one thing, the only thing that is fake about professional wrestling? And no one can answer it. And that is disturbing. And that's why what Brett's saying is so true, that they are acting like they're wrestling because they don't know the one single lie that they're trying to convince an audience of. The only thing that has ever been fake, the only thing that will ever be fake about professional wrestling, or really any single combat sport, be whatever it is you want to watch, the only thing fake about them is that the outcome is predetermined. That is the one lie. The lie is in you selling your intent to the audience. You going to the ring and trying to convince an audience, hey, I don't know who's winning this, but I'm going to do everything I can to do so. And you are going to care because the consequence of me losing is important to me, and therefore the consequence of me losing is important to you.